What would you do if 18 years of dedicated service to a company were suddenly dismissed as nothing more than an expensive line item, waved off by the new boss with a cool smile? Asterisk, asterisk. Inside the morning-lit conference room, fluorescent lights glared mercilessly down on Aaron Pierzia, 55-year-old lead systems engineer who had stood by Lyron Housing for nearly 2 decades as he calmly listened to Morgan Wright, the company's newly appointed CTO, with just 6 months under his belt, announce without a trace of remorse, "We can hire 3 junior engineers for your salary." Jasmine, the HR representative handling the paperwork, quietly pushed a severance package worth 2 months' pay across the table, as though sealing the lid on the career of someone she had witnessed single-handedly build the company's core infrastructure. She too wore an uneasy look, knowing full well how crucial Aaron was to the day-to-day survival of Lyron's operations. Yet Aaron didn't argue. He simply rose from his chair, collected the personal trinkets that represented 18 years of unwavering dedication, and placed them in a single cardboard box. As he passed by a few former colleagues, their eyes were cast downward, silently terrified that they might be next. A chilling realization crept over him that the same people who had deemed him too expensive would soon discover the hidden costs of losing the only person who truly understood every nook and cranny of Lyron's intricate systems. Stay tuned for the twists, the power plays, and the ultimate reckoning that will reveal the true price of this cost-cutting gamble. Asterisk. Asterisk. That same afternoon, Aaron Pierce left the gleaming lobby of Lyron Housing with a small cardboard box in his arms and a quietly simmering realization that the company he had served for nearly 2 decades would soon face a crisis of its own making. Driving through the suburban streets, he could still feel the fluorescent glare of the conference room lights, along with the echo of Morgan Wright's casual dismissal of his worth. Yet, when Aaron finally reached home, the late afternoon sun bathing the front porch in soft gold, he found himself unexpectedly calm. He set the box down, exhaled slowly, and moved to the backyard, where the waters of Lake Quincy stretched out in glassy serenity. Elahi's wife and the person who had seen him through countless late-night troubleshooting marathons appeared in the doorway, her eyes flickering with concern as she handed him a glass of smooth bourbon. Although she said nothing at first, he could read the quiet question in her gaze. What now? He remembered those first days, nearly 18 years ago, when Lyron Housing had been nothing but a modest property management firm called Riverview Properties. Back then, its founder, Harold Rivers, believed in long-term investments, trusting Aaron to architect a foundation that would scale beyond 2 or 3 small apartment complexes. Over time, Aaron had transformed a ragtag collection of second-hand computers into a finely tuned system that handled everything from resident applications and background checks to maintenance scheduling and automated billing. It was not merely coding, it was years of mapping out redundancies, designing fail-safes, and integrating custom software with an unwavering focus on stability and efficiency. He had labored through weekends and late nights, patching vulnerabilities before they caused chaos, and crafting intricate documentation outlines, though the upper management always balked at hiring a dedicated team to formalize them. His suggestions were brushed off as an unnecessary drain on resources, while, ironically, those very pieces of code were now the hidden skeleton key for keeping Lyron's operations running smoothly. When Harold stepped back to retire, his son Julian Rivers sold the company to a private equity group that rebranded it as Lyron Housing. That was when the slow shift began, as new executives arrived armed with bright-eyed MBAs and an aggressive focus on cost reduction. They talked about disrupting the market and leveraging off-the-shelf solutions, all the while failing to grasp how Aaron's custom architecture held every department together, from leasing offices to accounting. He had tried to communicate the risks, explaining that a single oversight in migrating from these tailor-made systems could bring an entire region of properties to a standstill. Yet his warnings were met with polite nods and condescending smiles, as though he were an old relic who just couldn't keep up with the times. Month by month, meeting by meeting, Aaron sensed his influence eroding. He was no longer invited to the strategic sessions he had once led, and whenever he mentioned the importance of thorough documentation or cross-training junior staff, the conversation was swiftly steered back to cutting unnecessary overhead. It was clear to him that they were teeing him up for departure, though he still held out hope that someone higher up would recognize the value of his deep institutional knowledge. Standing by the lake that evening, bourbon in hand, he understood more sharply than ever that Lyron Housing had severed its strongest lifeline to save on paper costs. If Morgan Wright and the board thought they could simply clone his expertise by hiring fresh-faced programmers at a fraction of the pay, they would soon find out that no budget spreadsheet could account for the intangible complexities buried within nearly 2 decades of evolution. Ella sat down beside him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder as the sky turned from orange to purple. "I know it hurts," she said softly, "but I also know they'll realize soon enough what they've lost." Aaron answered with a half-smile, gazing at the horizon. He might have been fired that morning, but he carried with him every intimate detail of a system that had grown layer by layer under his meticulous watch. If the higher-ups at Lyron insisted on seeing him as a mere expense, then so be it. Their short-sighted approach was bound to bring consequences that no one could sweep under a corporate rug. Aaron finished his bourbon and rose to his feet just as evening shadows began to edge across the lawn, leaving the lake shimmering under the dying sunlight. The sureness of his step belied any sense of defeat, and his mind, rather than stewing in bitterness, was already ticking through possibilities for the future. In the fleeting quiet, he recalled every budget meeting where he had pleaded for a team to document the labyrinthine codebase, every conversation cut short by corporate catchphrases about modernization, and every younger manager who eyed his seniority as a threat rather than an asset. He felt a strange kind of resolve in knowing that, while Lyron Housing had turned its back on him, they had also turned their backs on the systems, processes, and knowledge that kept their business afloat. The thought struck him that, regardless of what came next in his own career, the real drama was only beginning for those left behind, especially for anyone foolish enough to believe that you could replicate 2 decades of dedication overnight. Looking out over Lake Quincy, Aaron allowed himself a final moment of reflection. They have no idea what's coming, and I don't have to lift a finger to make it happen. As soon as Aaron Pierce turned in his company badge and drove away from Lyron Housing, the cracks he had long anticipated began to show themselves with startling speed. Within days, the system that had once seemed immovable, seamlessly interwoven web of tenant portals, maintenance requests, and billing modules started sputtering and failing under the clumsy hands of inexperienced junior engineers. Morgan Wright, so confident in his plan to replace Aaron with 3 lower-paid recruits, found himself bombarded by angry emails from property managers who couldn't log basic service tickets and by board members demanding to know why tenants were suddenly locked out of their own accounts. At first, Morgan attempted to placate everyone by insisting that a few minor glitches were inevitable during a period of transition, but when several of the company's flagship buildings reported complete outages, even his smooth corporate jargon couldn't conceal the fact that the heart of Lyron's infrastructure was in critical danger. While Aaron spent his newfound free time updating his resume and rediscovering the simple pleasure of an uninterrupted morning coffee, his phone buzzed incessantly with calls from unknown numbers and frantic messages left by the very people who had dismissed his value. It started with short voicemails from Morgan, whose casual confidence had quickly morphed into tight-lipped urgency as he asked Aaron to come in just for a consultation on the tenant portal source code. Then came Jasmine from HR, speaking in the carefully measured tone of someone desperate but trying not to appear so, offering Aaron $300 an hour for a temporary contract. In between these more formal messages, Aaron noticed several missed calls from Ethan, the database administrator he had hired and mentored over a decade ago, whose panicked texts revealed that the new team had broken something deep within the code, leaving thousands of maintenance requests stuck in limbo. Every day, the voices on Aaron's voicemail sounded a little more anxious, a little more cornered, as if each of them realized that time was running out and the slightest wrong move could crash the entire system beyond repair. He continued to ignore these calls, going about his daily life with a quiet certainty that Lyron Housing was now teetering on the edge of a self-inflicted disaster. When Morgan upped the ante by offering $500 an hour and a personal guarantee of minimal time commitment, it only confirmed Aaron's suspicion that no one left at the company truly comprehended the architecture he had created. The management team, too caught up in corporate metrics and cost-saving charts, had never invested in thorough documentation or cross-training. They had conveniently forgotten that a decade's worth of enhancements, patches, and specialized scripts were stored in Aaron's mind like layers of sediment, built up through countless late-night troubleshooting sessions and early morning code reviews. Now, with managers furious about lost revenue and the IT help desk drowning in support tickets, Morgan found himself stuck in a painful dilemma. Either swallow his pride and pay Aaron's increasingly valuable consulting rate, or watch the entire network collapse under the weight of its own neglected complexities. By the third day of near-constant outages, rumors spread across Lyron's offices about board members calling for emergency meetings to investigate how things had deteriorated so fast. Ethan slipped Aaron a discreet message confirming that the temporary consultants brought in to save the day were fumbling to make sense of the labyrinthine code, and any attempt to fix one module only seemed to trigger new errors in another. Even Jasmine, who initially stuck to polite professional calls, began leaving voicemails with a noticeable tremor in her voice, pleading for Aaron to at least speak with the executives. Yet, as he stood on his back porch, gazing out at the calm waters of Lake Quincy, Aaron felt no rush to rescue the company that had declared him a liability. He could almost envision Morgan and the board members huddled together in a sterile conference room, their expressions growing bleaker by the hour. What they all failed to understand was that Aaron's refusal to help was not about vengeance for its own sake, was a reminder that genuine expertise, built over years of meticulous effort, could never be relegated to a simple cost-cutting line item. And if they had to learn that the hard way, then so be it. Just when Aaron Pierce thought he might have to endure a long stretch of uncertainty, he woke one morning to find an intriguing email in his inbox from Devlin Systems, a regional competitor that specialized in property management software. The sender's name, Lawrence Devlin, immediately caught his eye, because Aaron had heard whispers for years about how Devlin Systems was quietly expanding its portfolio and challenging bigger players in the market. The subject line, opportunity to discuss a new role, made him raise an eyebrow, and he couldn't help but wonder if they had somehow caught wind of Lyron Housing's unraveling. The message was remarkably straightforward. Lawrence had apparently followed Aaron's work from afar, admired the sophistication of the systems he had built, and wanted to schedule a conversation at a nearby cafe, no strings attached, just an open invitation to talk about what Devlin Systems envisioned for its future. Despite still feeling the sting of Lyron's betrayal, Aaron's curiosity was piqued, and he agreed to meet, suspecting that any company wise enough to recognize his contributions might actually value the kind of deep expertise he had spent years refining. When Aaron arrived at the bustling coffee shop, the air thick with espresso and chatter, he found Lawrence waiting at a table by the window, accompanied by a single folder stuffed with notes. Unlike many of the polished executives Aaron had dealt with at Lyron, Lawrence greeted him with genuine warmth and a directness that cut through the usual corporate niceties. He admitted that Devlin Systems had tried hiring a trio of bright, fresh-out-of-college engineers to build a new integrated property management suite, only to discover that their sleek code didn't hold up under real-world stress when the user base surpassed 100 concurrent logins. With a wry smile, Lawrence added that he had studied the architecture Aaron had pioneered at Lyron, recognizing it as not just a patchwork of scripts and databases, but rather a carefully interwoven system designed to endure rapid scaling, server hiccups, and unpredictable usage spikes. It quickly became apparent that Lawrence wasn't looking for a quick fix or a cheap solution. He was looking for someone who understood how to build resilient platforms from the inside out. Someone who could lead a team toward a standard of excellence that went beyond just enough. In a move that caught Aaron off guard, Lawrence placed an offer on the table, a position as chief systems architect at Devlin Systems, with a salary not only competitive but distinctly higher than what Aaron had been receiving before his unceremonious exit from Lyron. There were also stock options, full benefits, and a clear invitation to help shape the direction of a company that seemed poised to disrupt the property management sector if it had the right technology in place. Lawrence made it clear that Devlin Systems wasn't seeking a bargain hire. They wanted to invest in proven experience, the kind that could foresee pitfalls before they turned into catastrophes and ensure that their infrastructure remained strong in the face of sudden growth. Although Aaron had entered the meeting guarded and prepared to negotiate, he found himself genuinely impressed by Lawrence's respect for the craft of system design and the thoroughness with which he had researched Aaron's background. Over the next hour, they spoke about Devlin's ambition to capture new markets, its steady track record of innovation, and its pressing need for someone who could help them unify their disparate tools into one cohesive platform. Aaron was almost reluctant to show too much enthusiasm, remembering how the board at Lyron had once dangled praise in front of him, only to discard him later. But Lawrence's sincerity left little room for doubt. Devlin Systems wanted him not simply to patch a few lines of code, but to fundamentally steer the company's technology roadmap, training and mentoring a team that would be proud to stand on the foundation he built. By the time their conversation ended, the half-empty coffee cups on the table had grown cold. Yet Aaron felt an unmistakable warmth in realizing that he no longer needed to prove his worth to people who saw him as little more than a cost figure on a balance sheet. Standing up and shaking hands, he promised to think it over, but privately, he knew this was the kind of opportunity he had always wished Lyron would offer. One that came with both recognition and genuine trust in his skills. That night, Aaron revisited every slight and dismissal he had endured at Lyron Housing, but also every triumph and innovative solution he had built under pressure. He considered how many times he had tried to introduce a documentation initiative or a cross-training program, only to be told, maybe next quarter, by executives who failed to see beyond immediate cost savings. Staring at the same lake that had offered solace when he was first let go, he weighed the certainty that Devlin Systems could provide a fresh start and a sense of validation that no buyout clause or severance package could ever replace. Ultimately, he recognized that Lawrence Devlin's offer was more than just a payday. It was an affirmation that real expertise, honed through years of trial and error, still mattered to those who appreciated the difference between flimsy, quick-fix software and robust, future-proof architecture. With a hint of a smile, Aaron crafted his response email, accepting the position and marking the beginning of a new chapter in his professional life, one that would allow him to build something lasting once again, only this time with a company that actually respected the work it took to get there. In the weeks following Aaron Pierce's decision to join Devlin Systems, the unsteady foundations he had glimpsed at Lyron Housing continued to crack under the weight of managerial missteps, brewing discontent, and technological failures that never seemed to end. Morgan Wright, who had once radiated an air of smug confidence, now faced daily confrontations with anxious employees and irate clients. Every morning brought new reports of data inconsistencies, frozen maintenance requests, and billing errors. Even though the company tried to plaster over the issues by hiring outside consultants at exorbitant fees, those experts found themselves baffled by the labyrinth of half-finished code patches and undocumented processes. Rumors swirled about yet another system crash, and the atmosphere on each office floor felt like an invisible pressure cooker, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Without a strong technical leader to keep morale steady, the best and brightest staffers began to wonder if they had a future at Lyron. Skilled developers, some of whom had once thrived under Aaron's mentoring, quietly submitted their resignations, citing burnout and a lack of coherent direction. Even the loyal database administrator, Ethan, whose dedication had carried the company through countless late-night emergencies, could no longer handle the constant panic triggered by each new crisis. He confided to a colleague that he felt as if he were desperately slapping Band-Aids on a sinking ship, while the people who caused the leaks stubbornly refused to listen. Soon enough, Ethan and several other talented individuals walked out the door, leaving Morgan scrambling to fill roles that required deep knowledge of the system's intricate design, something nearly impossible to find given Lyron's tarnished reputation in the local tech community. Meanwhile, the exodus of high-performing employees began to ripple outward, reaching the ears of clients who had already grown uneasy about the ongoing technical disruptions. The largest among them was Westbridge Real Estate, responsible for nearly a third of Lyron's revenue through property management contracts spanning multiple cities. For years, Aaron's reliable systems had maintained Westbridge's tenant portal and maintenance requests so smoothly that the client barely thought twice about technical details. However, when outages became a weekly occurrence and tenant complaints piled up about incorrect charges and long repair delays, Westbridge demanded immediate assurances that everything would be resolved. Morgan tried to paint a rosy picture in a hastily arranged video conference, claiming Lyron was implementing a comprehensive modernization plan. But the client representative saw through his vague buzzwords and asked for a more substantial proof of progress. When all they received were half-formed promises about new engineers and a consulting firm still struggling to understand the code, Westbridge made a drastic move. They began exploring other options for their property management needs. As word of Westbridge's potential departure trickled through Lyron's hallways, panic began to overshadow every conversation, from the break room to executive meetings. Even those who had championed the so-called cost-cutting strategies realized the magnitude of losing a major client, especially one that had once been a reliable long-term partner. Board members who had sided with Morgan saw their rosy financial projections wither, replaced by looming dread over what might happen if Westbridge officially pulled out and took a significant chunk of Lyron's revenue with them. The irony was not lost on anyone. The same executives who had cheered Aaron's termination as a smart financial move were now watching the company's most lucrative contract teeter on the brink of collapse. Consultants were hired and fired in rapid succession, each failing to stabilize a system built from years of deep, interconnected logic that had walked out the door with Aaron. In whispers over late-night cups of coffee, employees speculated that Lyron's leadership might have to beg for Aaron's return, and they weren't sure if even that would be enough to undo the damage. Behind the scenes, the sense of inevitable downfall intensified. Meetings turned tense, with managers reluctant to face the reality that cutting corners and alienating dedicated talent had consequences that no last-minute scramble could fix. Departments that relied on a smooth flow of data for leasing, tenant communication, and financial oversight found themselves fumbling through outdated spreadsheets and manual workarounds. Promising new hires, lured by what remained of Lyron's budget, took one look at the disorganized codebase before seeking greener pastures elsewhere. It became tragically clear that all the talk of modernizing and streamlining had been mere lip service compared to the real work of maintaining stable, well-documented systems. Each small failure added to the mounting frustration, and each fleeing employee left a void that no quick hire could fill. By the time official word leaked that Westbridge was terminating its contract, the turmoil inside Lyron Housing had reached critical levels. People openly whispered that the leadership's obsession with cost savings had turned a thriving company into a cautionary tale in record time. Some resigned in anticipation of worse news to come, while others hoped against hope that a miracle fix would appear. Yet the underlying truth remained grim. Once a company loses both its top talent and its biggest clients, the downward spiral becomes almost impossible to halt. And so, the stage was set for a catastrophic reckoning one that might have been avoided if only Lyron had kept sight of the value that true expertise and loyal relationships bring. The cost of short-sighted decisions weighed heavier than anyone had imagined, and all the board could do was scramble for options that were rapidly disappearing like sand slipping through their fingers. At Devlin Systems, Aaron Pierce found himself standing at the threshold of a fresh beginning, one where his expertise was not only acknowledged but actively celebrated. From his first week on the job, it was clear that this company was committed to doing things correctly, rather than simply cutting corners for the sake of appearances. During initial meetings with department heads and fellow engineers, Aaron discovered a collaborative culture eager to hear his perspective on everything from database architecture to user-facing interfaces, and he wasted no time in outlining a plan that emphasized rigorous documentation, comprehensive training, and redundancies capable of absorbing unforeseen shocks. Instead of rolling eyes and reluctant nods, he was met with thoughtful questions, genuine curiosity, and an unspoken relief that someone with true experience was finally here to guide them toward a more robust system. In the early days, Aaron found himself immersed in design sessions that stretched late into the evening as he worked to ensure that Devlin's existing infrastructure could scale seamlessly to meet surging client demands. He introduced a structured documentation process, complete with guidelines on how each module should be written, tested, and cataloged, which was an especially novel concept for some of the younger hires. Rather than viewing his insistence on quality as an unnecessary roadblock, the team embraced it, realizing that clarity in code and procedures could spare them countless headaches down the line. This openness to improvement became a magnet for talent. Seasoned developers in the region began to take note of the buzz around Devlin's progressive environment, while a few former Lyron employees, worn out by the chaos they'd endured, started discreetly reaching out to see if there might be a role for them under Aaron's leadership. One of those familiar faces was Ethan, the database administrator who had once worked tirelessly alongside Aaron. After observing the crumbling state of Lyron and hearing whispers of the well-run ship that Aaron was building at Devlin, he made the jump without hesitation. In less than a month, Aaron's blueprint for a new integrated property management platform began to take shape. Devlin's workforce, invigorated by the influx of skilled engineers, collaborated across departments to piece together modules for tenant applications, rent tracking, and maintenance scheduling, each linked seamlessly through carefully curated APIs. Every step of the way, Aaron emphasized not just the how but the why, ensuring that the company understood the importance of building structures designed to endure rather than simply pass a quick demonstration. While some hurdles arose like a momentary snag when transitioning historical data from legacy servers, Aaron and his team tackled them methodically, using the thorough documentation to isolate and resolve the issues. As deadlines approached, there was an undercurrent of excitement rather than dread. Because the developers knew they had a clear blueprint and a leader who encouraged them to find the best path forward, rather than simply patch the system with superficial fixes. Word of Devlin's flourishing momentum spread quickly, attracting more than just engineers seeking a stable workplace. Potential clients, weary of technical mishaps elsewhere, inquired about pilot programs and demos of Devlin's up-and-coming platform. Lawrence Devlin himself commented that he had never seen the company run more smoothly, crediting Aaron's insistence on comprehensive documentation and cross-training for the drastic reduction in system glitches and on-call emergencies. The trust and openness that permeated Devlin's hallways felt almost surreal to Aaron after his final days at Lyron. Yet it served as a constant reminder of how vital it was to cultivate a workplace where insight and experience were genuinely valued. By the end of that quarter, Devlin Systems had expanded its employee roster, solidified new client deals, and seen an unmistakable uptick in positive industry buzz. As Aaron passed through rows of focused programmers and analysts, he couldn't help but remember the environment he left behind at Lyron, where genuine warnings were dismissed under the banner of cost savings. Here, the leadership's willingness to invest in lasting quality meant that no single person bore an outsized burden, and no critical knowledge was locked away in one individual's mind. The drama of his abrupt departure from Lyron had, in an unexpected way, opened the door to a setting in which his vision and hard-earned experience were not merely tolerated but truly embraced. Looking back, Aaron realized that this turn of events might be the best revenge of all, to build something stronger, more resilient, and more forward-thinking than anything Lyron's short-sighted executives could have imagined. Not long after Aaron Pierce had helped Devlin Systems solidify its standing as an emerging powerhouse in property management technology. Rumors began circulating that Lyron Housing, the very place that had dismissed him so carelessly, was on the brink of being sold at a fraction of its former valuation. The loss of major clients, coupled with the mass exodus of experienced staff, had eroded investor confidence to such an extent that the private equity group behind Lyron was desperate to offload what remained before it became a total financial write-off. Despite the potential risks, Lawrence Devlin saw an opportunity too enticing to pass up, especially with Aaron on board to guide any future acquisition. Once Westbridge Real Estate pulled out its contract, Lawrence realized a carefully orchestrated buyout could scoop up Lyron's remaining properties, talent, and technology licenses for a bargain. When Devlin Systems officially announced its intent to purchase Lyron, the news rattled both the industry and Lyron's shell-shocked executives, who still remembered how dismissively they had shown Aaron the door not too long ago. Whispers spread through Lyron's half-empty corridors that their former lead systems engineer was now a key figure at the company planning to take them over. Meetings behind closed doors turned frantic, with some board members questioning whether the acquisition would strip them of whatever leverage they had left. Yet there was no viable alternative. Potential buyers had been scared off by Lyron's mounting technical debt and client dissatisfaction, and only Devlin came to the table with a serious offer, albeit one that reflected Lyron's diminished worth. Throughout negotiations, Aaron maintained a polite but distant stance, quietly reviewing the old infrastructure he had once built, which now lay in partial disarray. Meanwhile, Lawrence and his team took a hard line on the purchase price, citing the extensive work needed to restore Lyron's faltering systems to full capacity. Even so, the buyout was soon finalized at a much lower valuation than anyone at Lyron could have imagined a year prior. When the ink dried on the merger documents, Devlin Systems officially absorbed Lyron, rebranding and streamlining operations under the Devlin Integrated Property Management umbrella. The irony was clear to everyone involved. The very systems that had kept Lyron afloat for nearly 2 decades were now reverting to the man who had designed them in the first place. Only this time, he was returning with the power to implement changes on his own terms. Soon after the acquisition, Aaron walked through Lyron's old headquarters now, emblazoned with Devlin's logo on the lobby wall sand, observed clusters of nervous employees who looked both relieved and wary at the sight of him. He held a series of short, candid gatherings in the same conference rooms he once frequented, explaining how Devlin planned to unify the two companies' technology stacks without sacrificing the core competencies people had spent years developing. Determined not to repeat Lyron's mistakes, Aaron introduced a structured integration roadmap that called for open communication, thorough code documentation, and immediate cross-training. Those who remembered his previous proposals before they were dismissed as too expensive recognized the irony, but also understood these steps were the only way to pull the merged company out of its downward spiral. Morgan Wright, the CTO who had replaced Aaron and declared him obsolete, was notably absent, quietly removed by the board in the final stages of the buyout. He left behind a legacy of fractured decisions and half-baked solutions. In contrast, employees who had stuck around long enough to see the acquisition through found themselves cautiously hopeful, witnessing a wave of new hires from Devlin merging with the remaining Lyron veterans. Under Aaron's guidance, these cross-functional teams tackled the backlog of technical issues that had plagued Lyron, repaired broken modules, and initiated a documentation sprint that would finally unravel the tangled mess of code. The effect was almost immediate. Within weeks, client complaints subsided, and properties once on the verge of leaving altogether began to reconsider Devlin Integrated Property Management as a viable partner. Though there was no triumphant fanfare or overt displays of revenge, the quiet sense of poetic justice was unmistakable. Aaron, once dismissed as nothing more than a line item to be cut, now stood at the helm of an integration that allowed him to not only resurrect the systems he'd created but also shape them into something stronger and more future-proof. In the end, the buyout served as a stark reminder of how easily companies can lose sight of real expertise and how costly that oversight can become. For Aaron, It was enough to see the work he had spent years perfecting brought under a company that respected both the code and the people who wrote it, signaling to everyone involved that sometimes the best form of vindication is simply coming back on one's own terms to build something better. With the acquisition complete and the dust finally settling, Devlin Integrated Property Management, as the company was now known, ushered in a period of unexpected tranquility that felt almost surreal compared to the chaotic months leading up to the merger. Under Aaron Pierce's leadership, the previously disjointed infrastructure of both Devlin and Lyron was unified into a single, coherent framework, designed from the ground up with an emphasis on stability, security, and clear documentation. Teams that had once spoken different technical languages found common ground through well-defined processes and cross-department training programs, ensuring that no piece of crucial knowledge remained locked away in any one individual's mind. More importantly, the culture Aaron fostered rewarded collaboration and proactive problem-solving, encouraging everyone to share insights rather than guard them in fear of being made redundant. Within a year, Devlin Integrated Property Management had expanded into new territories, driven in part by the confidence of major clients who saw tangible proof that the new system could handle high volumes of user traffic without buckling under pressure. Those who had worked with Aaron at Lyron before its decline recognized the transformation. No longer burdened by short-term cost-cutting measures, the architecture hummed along with a resilience rooted in careful planning and consistent maintenance. Where once there were frantic late-night calls demanding emergency fixes, there were now organized sprint cycles, code reviews, and meticulously updated documentation. It was not that obstacles disappeared entirely. Any large-scale operation faces challenges, but that the team was prepared for them. Thanks to robust fail-safes and the thorough testing protocols Aaron had insisted upon since day one. The shift in company morale was palpable as well. Developers, who had grown weary of corporate politics and top-down decisions at Lyron, discovered a renewed sense of purpose under Devlin's ethos of respect for expertise and thoughtful investment in quality. Even executives, initially wary of pouring resources into invisible tasks like documentation and training, conceded that the long-term benefits far outweighed the upfront costs. As satisfied clients began to spread the word about Devlin's reliability and transparent communication, new contracts rolled in, fueling an expansion that created opportunities for both veteran employees and bright newcomers eager to learn from a system built the right way. In a poignant twist, some of Lyron's old guard, once scattered or driven out by the chaotic layoffs, returned under the Devlin banner, this time finding an environment that valued their experience rather than viewing it as an excessive expenditure. One crisp autumn morning, Aaron found himself reflecting on how dramatically things had changed since he'd quietly packed up his desk at Lyron Housing. Standing in the same server room that once represented the crown jewel of his career now, equipped with upgraded hardware and robust backup solution, she felt not the bitterness of revenge, but rather the satisfaction of seeing his original vision reborn on a larger and more sustainable scale. The system's triumph was a testament to the power of doing things right from the start, of respecting the knowledge and diligence that seasoned professionals bring, and of understanding that short-term savings often lead to long-term failure if you neglect the fundamentals. It was no grand show of retribution, but a deeper vindication rooted in the simple fact that experience, integrity, and quality still held value in an industry enamored with the latest buzzwords and cost-saving measures. Through every staff meeting, every newly signed client agreement, and every successful rollout of an updated feature, the unspoken lesson was clear. When a company invests in real expertise and stands by the principle of building strong, future-proof solutions, it reaps rewards that extend far beyond immediate profit margins. By allowing Aaron Pierce to put his ideas into practice, documenting code meticulously, training teams thoroughly, and creating an environment where people felt safe to propose innovations, Devlin Integrated Property Management had grown into a formidable force, one that served as a cautionary tale to competitors who still believed experience was an unnecessary expense. If Aaron's journey proved anything, It was that genuine respect for knowledge and thoughtful planning could rescue even a troubled enterprise from the brink of collapse and transform it into something stronger than ever. Thank you for joining us on this intense journey of corporate intrigue, redemption, and the undeniable power of hard-earned expertise. If you're hungry for more stories of dramatic turnarounds and unexpected victories in the world of business, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter, because sometimes the best stories are the ones that remind us why respect for quality and talent is never negotiable.